Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday evening. Tonight, we're lucky enough to have a wonderful researcher from my side of the world in Australia, and I'm in New Zealand, just to clarify. We've got the wonderful Dr. Jennifer Cohen, and she's going to be talking to us about some nutrition research that we have done over this side of the world called Reboot-Kids. And it's an online parent-led intervention to improve fruit and vegetable intake in childhood cancer survivors. So Dr. Jennifer Cohen is an evaluation manager at Canteen, Australia, and a senior research fellow at the School of Clinical Medicine, Faculty of Medical and Health at UNSW in Sydney. She has over 18 years of experience as a clinical dietitian and researcher, and has publications focusing on the supportive care needs of children and young people with cancer, both during and after treatment. Her primary project at the University of New South Wales is the Reboot-Kids Program at the moment, which, as we've said, is an online parent-led intervention to improve fruit and vegetable intake in children early off cancer treatment. So thank you, Jen, for making time for us this evening, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will share my screen and hopefully I can still see you once this is happening. Okay, that's looking good. Okay, that should work. So just getting my Zoom set up so I can see some of you as well. Thank you very much, Amy, for the invite to come and speak about Reboot. It's a project that's been a long time in the making, and it's always a privilege to be able to present the results to a wide group of people. So I really appreciate the invite. And for just those, as Amy said, I am coming from Australia at the moment. It is 8:30 at night. Amy, it's 10:30 at night for her, so she's even later than me. And I live about an hour south of Sydney. So I grew up in Sydney, but now I'm in a beautiful area called Wollongong, about an hour south of Sydney, a very coastal area. So I'm very privileged and lucky to be there. And I live on Aboriginal land called Dharawal land, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So as Amy said, I'm presenting on really the development and evaluation of our Reboot-Kids program. And firstly, I really want to acknowledge there's quite a few names on this screen of people who've been involved with this, and I'm lucky to have two of them here, which is Amy and Kristen, who've been part of this project. And there's quite a number of people over the years who've been really involved. And I want to extra acknowledge Professor Claire Wakefield, who has been my collaborator since before when I was a junior researcher all those many years ago, and has been involved with my nutrition research since I started way back when. And I also want to acknowledge the Kids Cancer Project, which is a charity here in Australia, who generously funded the last phase of this project, which is going to be the main focus of what I'm presenting on today. But as I was getting this presentation together, I actually thought I'd do a slight bit of a history lesson. I acknowledge that when I'm doing this, it's going to age me immensely. So I do admit that. But I also wanted to acknowledge that it's easy when you see someone presenting results of a randomized controlled trial to think that it's, these are done quite easily and quickly and in a vacuum. But I thought a little bit of a history lesson also might show all the steps that we've taken to get to this point. Just so people don't think it sort of came really quickly and it's really easy to do this work. It does take a longer time, and I want to acknowledge all the work that's gone into it. So quick history lesson about why this project came about. And I figured if I'm talking to a lot of people who are very much interested in nutrition and paediatric oncology, some of this will be probably known to you, but would appreciate the history lesson. So really, I started working as a clinical dietitian at Sydney Children's Hospital in the paediatric oncology unit way back in 2004. I'd been working in adult services prior to that. So we're talking a long time ago. And, in those days, at that time, I was really focused on, obviously, clinical practice of during treatment. And really, it wasn't until 2006 where the St Jude's, the seminal paper, St Jude's survivorship study came out, really showing the effects that childhood cancer treatment can have in the survivorship phase. And that's where we, obviously this is stuff that a lot of you all know. This is where the early paper showing, things like cardiovascular disease was the leading non-cancer cause of mortality in childhood cancer survivors. And this, there was a lot of work around showing risk factors such as a high BMI, metabolic syndrome really added to this risk factor. And there was a little bit of research starting to come out in those days looking at the dietary intake of adult survivors of childhood cancer, but there really wasn't much happening in sort of that early phase. So then really as myself working in clinical practice, obviously each healthcare system across the world is different, but I was the only dietitian working on about a 20-bed ward, about 100 new diagnoses a year, 4 bone marrow transplant beds. And really my sole role, and also I had capacity for as the only dietitian working there, was looking at on-patient work. So really a focus on weight loss. But what was happening is as the years got on, I was starting to get referrals to see children early off treatment. A lot of them, it was the opposite we were happening. We were seeing weight gain, excessive intake. And I was definitely seeing different dietary patterns that were happening off treatment than what happening on treatment. So obviously the poor dietary habits we see on treatment with, the need for a lot of tube feeding was different off treatment. But in those days, there was really no literature out there looking at of dietary intake early off treatment. We'd had a lot of stuff starting to come out. We're talking, 2009, 2010, looking at adult patterns of childhood cancer survivors, but not early off treatment. But I also had very little capacity as a sole dietitian working in a large teaching hospital to see lots of these families off treatment, and there was really nothing out there. And so really this is how it all came about. So some of my earlier work, and I always look at these early studies going, I could have done a lot better, but it really was the early days of nutrition research. And it was, if I even acknowledge my age, it was probably before the time that we started really focusing on dietary patterns. These days, a lot of it was really about looking at nutrients. So some of my earlier work was looking at what are the dietary patterns of childhood cancer survivors early off treatment. So we're talking sort of in that first 5 years off treatment. And it was really a very small cross-sectional study, but again, it was we saw that the dietary patterns were changed. So we were seeing excessive energy intakes, inadequate nutrient intake, especially around folate, calcium, and iron. And then we did a bit of qualitative work with the parents, of asking what were the parents seeing around their child's eating, and really try to unpack parents recalling what their child's dietary pattern was before they got sick, before they had cancer treatment, to what it was now. And I think this is probably one of the most interesting parts, is that what I was starting to see clinically, the parents were reporting, which is that parents were saying that they were noticing their child's appetite was sort of excessive. They'd gone through maybe 1 or 2 years of treatment where their children were not eating anything, and all of a sudden this reverse was happening. And this was happening in about 2/3 of the parents we interviewed were saying this. Interestingly, they were all talking about fruit and vegetable intake. Now, in Australia, and I'm sure it's no different to the rest of the world, fruit and vegetable intake in children is not great. We only have 4% of our population who eat an adequate fruit and vegetable intake. So I do acknowledge that piece in the general population. But the parents are reporting that compared to even what their child used to be like pre-treatment, they were just not eating fruit and vegetables. They said they used to eat some veggies before they got diagnosed, and now they refuse to eat it. And it was a real pattern that we saw across a lot of the parents. And then there was this increased desire for sort of junk food and overeating. So these were just some of the parents that were reporting this kind of work. So we were starting to see what I'd seen in practice, these kind of change in patterns early off treatment. And so then as sort of time progressed, and this actually only got published recently, but was a bit of an earlier work, and so I am skipping forward a little bit, is that as I acknowledged, some of that early work we did was really about nutrient intake. I really wanted to look at dietary patterns. And one of my PhD students, Catherine Firmly, actually looked at diet quality in childhood cancer survivors early off treatment, and we even managed to compare it to age-matched controls. Because again, in Australia, like around the world, when we compare to controls, the dietary patterns of children in Australia aren't great either. So we also wanted to see if, childhood cancer survivors had worse dietary patterns in the general population. So we looked at diet quality, and there was a significant difference. between the childhood cancer survivor group and the control group. So they had significantly poorer diet quality scores. And interesting, we were looking at things like fussy eating, child feeding behaviours. And again, there was a significantly higher parent-reported rates of picky or fussy eating compared to the control group. So again, the same patterns were emerging, different poor dietary patterns, a lot of fussy eating, and even in slightly older kids, poor fruit and vegetable intake. And this is some work of one of my other PhD students, Lauren Towers, where we were actually looking at weight changes over time. And again, what we were seeing, now this group was specifically acute lymphoblastic leukemia patients. Our cohorts at the time, we're getting a probably slightly different treatment regime than other ALL patients around the world. But our group were getting 2 doses of steroids sort of early in the phase, but they didn't get steroids in the survivorship phase. But what we found, and you can see from these lines, is that BMI Z scores sort of early off treatment were rising with their first dose of steroids, coming down when they were having sort of some of their more emetic treatment, 4 rounds of high-dose methotrexate. And then when they had this second round of high-dose steroids, we were seeing a really significant increase in BMI Z scores that then really just continued throughout. And we've got a little bit of data, not a huge amount, of some of our patients we've managed to follow, again, finding that their BMI Z scores were staying high. So again, we were starting to see high BMI Z scores that were increasing compared to pre-diagnosis and were staying high, rates of fussy eating, poor fruit vegetable intake, and parent reports of overeating. So basically, we knew we had to do something about this. And again, as a sole dietitian working in clinically based research, I didn't have capacity to see all patients during treatment, but we knew we needed to do something about it. So we actually looked at a systematic review to see what was out there as far as interventions that we could use. And at the time, and again, where I'm aging myself, I haven't got the date for this one, but I think it was probably around 2012, 2013, we did a systematic review of looking at what interventions were out there. So again, this is a while back now, looking specifically at childhood cancer survivors and kind of interventions we could use for our patient group. And there really was a dearth of interventions out there at that time. There was about 3. They mostly focused on calorie intake or calcium intake. So really then we embarked on a mission to go, well, what could we develop? What kind of intervention we could develop, knowing that we couldn't do one-on-one individual counselling because we didn't have the funding or capacity. So we wanted to develop some kind of program to help these families, to help their children's fussy eating and fruit and vegetable intake after treatment. So Lauren Towers, who was PhD student, really embarked on looking at what are the kind of interventions that we wanted to develop that were going to help. And so we actually turned to the literature in the general pediatric population, and Lauren did a very lovely systematic review and meta-analysis looking at really interventions that were targeting fruit and vegetable intake in children. So general interventions, not cancer specific. And so this was helping us to unpack what are the kind of things that we would need to see in an intervention for it to be effective. And the review really came up with things like parental involvement increased, success of any dietary intervention in children and adolescents, and these are really principles of really helping children with fussy eating or any feeding practices, which is having parents always providing fruit and vegetable intake in a stress-free environment, lots of exposures to fruit and vegetables. So we were using these principles to go, well, let's develop an intervention. We were actually lucky at the time that there had been an intervention developed in Australia, again, for children in the general population. It was a telephone-based intervention looking to increase fruit and vegetable intake in children in the general Australian population. So rather than reinventing the wheel, what we decided to do was to develop our intervention was adapting theirs. So this intervention was a telephone-based kind of individual counselling session with parents. So these were younger kids, so we focused on the parents, and it really used principles of fussy eating. I won't go into them too much, but things like division of a responsibility, things like repeated exposures to foods in a stress-free environment, parent role modelling, supportive family routines. So we adapted that program. We made it cancer specific. So we added a module explaining to parents why nutrition was important, why we were focusing on fruit and vegetables and fussy eating. And this is where Reboot came about. So it really was an adapted intervention rather than something that we made up from scratch. So we piloted it with, I think, about 20 families, and that was part of Lauren's PhD. And again, at that point, it was a telephone-based intervention. So it was Lauren, as the PhD student, counselling families through the 3 sessions, and all the parents had a manual. And at the time, the parents were really happy with the content, the ones who went through it. So we had really high levels of finding that the intervention was useful. It helped parents to feel more confident about what to feed their children after treatment. And again, for those of you who work clinically with these families, a lot of the families just didn't feel confident to know what to feed their children because they'd spent so long with their children not eating during cancer treatment, having a lot of issues with, side effects because of cancer treatment. A lot of them ended up tube feed. So a lot of parents just didn't have the confidence to even know what to feed their children anymore. So again, that was the intervention helped parents to feel more confident. They liked the kind of information they got and they felt the content was easy. And more importantly, we saw an increase in fruit and vegetable intake serves. Only small, but we're talking a brief intervention. And I think this is something I'll probably say a few times, but the caveat to all of this is that this intervention is about helping those who are really I call the bottom of the pyramid. So those who are families where, dietary intakes have changed because of cancer treatment, but they don't have food phobia or food aversions or haven't got poor dietary intake for those kids who might have been diagnosed when they were babies, were tube fed the whole time and haven't learned good dietary patterns. So these aren't the intensive treatment. This was for general population. But as a side note, we saw an increase in fruit and vegetable intake with the pilot. So we saw that parents liked it and we saw that they liked fruit and vegetable intake. So we thought this warranted then, a bigger trial. Saying that, again, I'm aging myself, but then we realized that if we wanted a sustainable model that was going to be able to implement it, outside of a research setting, we needed to get it off as a telephone-based intervention because we couldn't fund that long term. So we actually collaborated with a group at the University of New South Wales and they moved it online for us. Again, at that time, a lot of the online platforms where you can put education, things like Teachable, didn't actually exist. So they actually built a bespoke online system for us. So what we did is we moved all the modules that were in the manual that the parents got online, and we added quite a bit of interactive sort of elements to it where parents could write answers and things like that. So we moved Reboot online, and as we said, we have 3 modules, and I think I've got a few slides of what Reboot looked like at the time. It looks a bit different now, but when we went through the intervention, we have 3 modules, one about what is healthy eating, and the second one is really about those practical strategies for families, and again, the third is sort of, summary and planning for the future. So you can see here, this is what the some of the modules look like. Actually, no, I don't have many slides. I should have actually put more slides in showing you what the program looks like. I can always send them around. So 4 modules, and it was quite pretty. We had lots of recipes and some helpful hints. The thing was, because we had gone from the pilot had been as a telephone-based intervention, and this one now became an online intervention. We still kept the telephone base, but eventually we wanted to remove those. What we decided to do was a randomized control trial this time rather than a pilot trial. But we still had, because it was really a new intervention, because it was online, our primary aim was about acceptability. So really, this is the main trial, and I'll focus on this one more. So this is the Reboot trial that's really been going probably. We finished recruitment about 12 months ago, so it was probably about 3 years before that. So this is probably about a 5-year project, and it was really about assessing, as a randomized control trial, whether Reboot was acceptable and appropriate for parents of cancer survivors. There was secondary aims looking at fruit and vegetable intake, so looking at, again, serves of fruit and vegetables and fruit and vegetable variety. So we added a few different measures in. We also added some measures in around self-efficacy for parents. Did they have the confidence to be able to help feed their children? And I think this was an important piece because, again, this is a brief intervention. We're not looking at something that's going to have a long-term follow-up. It's about, again, giving parents confidence that they know some strategies and what they can do to help their children to slowly improve their intake after cancer treatment. So that's why we added self-efficacy in as one of the measures. And this was a multi-site trial. So the primary site was Sydney Children's Hospital, where I was working, and Monash Children's, and Kristen, who is here, was the lead on that site, and then SIOP Children's, which Amy was the lead on that site. Plus, we also did recruitment across quite a lot of social media. And I could talk a whole lot, it's probably a separate discussion about recruitment strategies for interventions. And interestingly, we actually had quite good success with the social media. Some of the group that funded us, the Kids Cancer Project, they over time did a few sort of social media campaigns, sending it out into the world. And then the organisation Red Kite, who's the one who has the program now, I'll talk about them later, they also did some social media for us, and we found that from a recruitment standpoint, that actually worked some of the best. And I think we were lucky because even though we only had 3 sites, somehow we ended up in a few parent Facebook groups or parent groups. So I think, group parents had come together from certain hospitals who are all having their children treated at the same time. These were closed groups. I think someone shared it in these Facebook groups, and all of a sudden we had a lot of people recruited into the study. So for us, I think social media was probably one of the most effective. We had a little bit of, well, maybe not going viral, but we were just lucky that people were sharing in the right places. But that really helped with recruitment. I couldn't tell you then, we don't have numbers around what's our response rate or anything like that, because we just don't know how many people we reached. Anyway, side note, social media in this case did work. So what did the intervention actually look like? What were we studying? So as we said, we had the online modules. So parents, when they signed up to the study, got instant access to the program, to the 3 modules, and then we offered a support call after that. Now, the support call didn't give any extra information. All the information they needed about the intervention was on the website, but it was really around sort of asking questions about how they're going. Not all parents took up the support calls. Some loved them, some, didn't take them up. It's really hard. This is a group of parents with young kids, so obviously time is an essence, which is why we wanted to move it online. So they had 3 modules, 3 support calls, and then we did baseline surveys, and then surveys at time 1, which was a post-program. We collected information pre-post on demographics and diagnosis. We assessed acceptability and appropriateness. We used the child dietary questionnaire to assess dietary, like fruit and vegetable intake, as well as like a measure that looks at fruit and veg scores. I'll talk about a bit more of that later. So we did that. We as far as the self-efficacy questions, we ended up having to, going backwards, end up having to develop our own questionnaire. We looked high and low for appropriate self-efficacy measures, and there's something we are seeing more and more in not only nutrition interventions, but a lot of interventions about measuring self-efficacy. But we just couldn't find any great tools. So a lot of them were individual questions or an adapt and measure. And then we also looked at home food environment. I don't go into it as much today. That's a validated measure, but we also looked at that as well. So what did we find? So we ended up with 39 in the intervention and 37 in the controls. Now, this is, like I said, probably took us about 2 years of recruitment to get to those numbers. I was impressed that we got there. I want to acknowledge again, Amy, I think you're about 20 of these from Aotearoa. So thank you very much for the recruitment at your end. But again, I don't want you thinking that like this just happened. This was probably, I'd say in the end, it was probably 2 to 3 years of recruitment to get these numbers. And a lot of it is that it's not that parents don't want to do the intervention. It's just, time is always a hard thing. So trying to get families, they want to do the intervention, but when they actually then go to sign up and then do the intervention, time and life gets in the way. So we're really happy with the numbers. And as you can see, as far as in the end, our randomization worked, and we really had no significant difference as far as intervention and control with things like gender and their diagnosis. And here's a little bit more information. The red is the intervention group, and the green is the control group. And again, there was no significant difference in any of these factors across the both groups. So we really did get a nice balance, intervention and control group. As you'd expect, about 80% of the participants had chemotherapy. Some, in addition, had about 30% had surgical removal, and there was a small percentage that had bone marrow transplant. So that number for the intervention was slightly higher, but it wasn't significantly different. So again, from across that, the treatment regimes were similar, and age at diagnosis and current age were also very similar. So as you can see, that even though we offered this to parents of children really of what we call primary school age, so it's sort of, 0 up to about 12 or 13, this cohort was definitely that younger cohort, which is, again, what we would expect in this population. So, again, no difference between the intervention and the control group. So, the results, the more interesting stuff. What did we find? So, the red is the fruit and the green is the vegetable, and this is looking at serve sizes. And again, I've got a lot of dietitians in here. We were not looking for, we didn't expect, in Australia, the recommendations for children, depending on their age, is somewhere between 3 to 5 serves of fruit and veg, depending on the age. We were never looking at perfection in this group. It was a short intervention. We were just looking at improvements. That's all we were aiming for, and that's what we saw. So for fruit intake, the intervention group went from serve sizes of 2 to 2.9, where the control group really had no change. So again, it was really nice having the control group, as hard as that is to do this. And sorry, I didn't actually mention the control group were a waitlist control, so they got the intervention at the end. Forgot to mention that part. So that everyone got the intervention at the end. But what it was really nice having the control group, because we saw that the changes were happening in intervention, but there weren't changes happening at the same time in the control group. And the vegetable intake was, even more impressive. They went from 1.6 serves to 2.1, and the control group only had a slight increase. As a side note, we didn't do any inferential statistics because we didn't reach an adequate power for this project. Because of the change of methodology, it was still a pilot RCT. We just did it, we still managed to do an RCT, but it was a pilot. So I haven't got any statistical analysis. We just didn't reach power for this. And as though we would have liked to, again, time it is and funding and everything else, we just didn't get there. But luckily, it was a pilot trial as well. So these are all descriptive statistics, but again, we were seeing patterns of improvement of vegetable intake. Obviously still lower than recommendations, but at least there was definitely an improvement compared to control group. When I was talking about this sort of this fruit and vegetable score, it's a tool, and I won't go into it too much, but it's really asks a few little different questions about the child's fruit and vegetable intake. So it asks questions like, how many different fruits and vegetables they had in the last week? Because this score isn't just about numbers of fruit and vegetables, but about dietary variety of fruit and vegetables. So it asks about the variety of fruit and vegetables, how many they've eaten the previous day, how many they've eaten in a week. So there's a whole range of questions, and then it gives you a nice score. The higher the score, the better the dietary intake. And as we can see from the intervention group, from baseline to post-intervention, the dietary variety score went from 10 to 14, where the control group remained the same. So again, not only were we seeing increase in dietary, increase in serve sizes, we were seeing an increase in some patterns, like a variety of fruit and vegetables, which is also really exciting to see for a very brief intervention. Because this was a pilot RCT, we also did qualitative interviews with a subgroup of parents after the intervention. And what we were seeing with the numbers, we were seeing from the parents. So parents were talking about, after this intervention, they saw that their children were having a greater diversity of fruit and vegetables. So it wasn't they were just eating the same vegetables over and over again. They were starting to appreciate and want to eat other vegetables. And more importantly, they were talking about their children were starting to be receptive to trying new foods, which, when we're seeing levels of fussy eating or picking eating, it's really nice to see that, children are willing to, at least, or are receptive to trying new fruit and vegetables, because this is going to help set good dietary patterns long term. And again, there was an increased confidence with both the families and the children to want to try new foods. And this is a really nice quote from one of the participants. His confidence and my confidence really improved. We asked them what was the best thing. Now I just put stuff on his plate and say, we'll just try it. In terms of expanding his repertoire of food, it's been a huge, huge impact. So again, if anyone's worked in the fussy eating phase space, it's all about providing lots of fruit and vegetable, but in a very sort of stress-free environment. So there's no pressure for the child to eat the fruit and vegetables. It was about, providing it, getting back into the habits of providing a variety, and then letting that child decide if they're going to eat it. So again, principles of division of responsibility. So these are the self-efficacy measures. Again, I don't have inferential statistics on this. The ones that are highlighted, really the ones that we're seeing an increase compared to the control group. So again, it's a similar pattern. This was more quantitative, but parents reported a confidence in being able to provide a variety of fruit and vegetables, variety of vegetables their child every week. So pre-intervention parents, only about 46% said they were confident to do that. Post-intervention, 82% of parents said that they felt confident to start providing a variety of vegetables to their child. As far as confidence to effectively manage their child's eating habits, there was an increase. It's still only 50%, went from 30 to 47%. So that's probably something that we still need to work on, but at least we were seeing an increase compared to the control group. And other things like confidence we did a little bit about kind of, eating principles. So, not just providing food because a child says no, and always providing non-core foods, which is some of the dietary habits we would have seen during treatment. Is sort of giving parents confidence to say no, but to provide sort of healthy alternatives, but not be forceful with it. So again, we were starting to see some of the things that we were teaching parents during the intervention were coming out during in the research. Sorry, just need some water. And again, the qualitative interviews really backed this up as well. Parents started feeling confident with things like meal preparation and trying new recipes, cooking together as a family unit, and greater involvement with children with preparing meals. And this is all the part of the stuff that we teach in the program, is that encouraging children to eat, especially fruits and vegetables, but even healthy foods, isn't just about serving on a plate. It's about, eating together as a family, modeling good behavior, preparing meals together. And again, those things we were teaching, we were seeing in the coming through the qualitative interviews. And again, this is quite a nice quote, because I think it really sums up what the parents sort of, a lot of them think after their child's finished treatment. Sorry, it's been a long day. One of the parents said, I think we just got out of the habit of trying new things and even offering new things. So our participation in the program actually forced us to start reintroducing foods that had somehow been dropped off the menu. And again, that's not a surprise if they'd been, if their child had been in hospital for a long time, hadn't been eating a long time because of their treatment. It's easy as parents just to get out of the habit of sort of offering new food. So a lot of this was it was also a reminder to parents to sort of go back to some of the dietary habits they had before their child got sick. As far as measures of appropriateness, again, we had similar patterns of high appropriateness. Parents sort of said that a high proportion said the program, they felt like the program helped with them skills development, helped give them confidence to manage their child's eating habits. And again, that's skills to take away with them to help increase their child's vegetable intake as well as fruit and vegetable intake. And again, that strategy piece as well. Acceptability, again, was pretty high with things like finding the modules really easy to understand and the quality of the information. Slightly lower with things like found the modules to be relevant and the modules to be interesting. The interesting one, I think we didn't quite unpack enough, but it's still pretty high, but not as high as I'd like. The found the modules to be relevant, I think this is, again, a lot to do with depending on who came through the program. Sorry, keep choking, I need some water. We didn't screen people out from this, so really anyone who wanted to come on the program came. And we did get a few families where really their child probably would have benefited for much more intensive feeding therapy. So, referrals back to a clinical dietitian, referral potentially to feeding therapy groups, so things like speech pathology and OT, because these are the ones who had more likely to have, food aversions or food phobia or poor dietary eating. and our program was never going to help them. So I think there was some who came through that we just couldn't help with this group. So, and that's because we didn't screen for it in the first place. So really that is kind of where our program ended up. So we definitely found that the program helped with fruit and vegetable intake, it helped with parent confidence and dietary variety. There was some recommendations that also came, and I think you might have some talks potentially coming up in the future around physical activity, and interestingly, that was something the parents said they would love it, an addition of a physical activity component to the program. That piece, you know how I said they sort of that only 76% said it was interesting. Again, parents sort of said they wanted even more visuals and more sort of pictures around serve sizes and images. And we did have some in the program, but obviously needed a lot more of that kind of visual space. And again, a lot of parents wanting a peer discussion group. A lot of times for parents, it's just about normalizing that what they're going through after their treatment with their child's eating, you know, is normal. And a lot of families are struggling with this. They would have, you know, during treatment, they would have met a lot of families and known, you know, when the children were not eating, a lot of other families' children were not eating, and they probably had that peer connection. But off treatment, when there's really no kind of, you know, they're coming into hospital less, they're not seeing the doctors that much, they're not seeing health professionals. I guess they are feeling isolated and alone, that what their child is doing and those change in dietary patterns, they think they're alone. But really they're not, and it's really about normalizing. So a lot of them would have loved that kind of peer connection with other parents to find out sort of what was going on for them. So really, I guess the conclusion at that point was the fact that the trial worked, yay. We had really good results. The thing is that, again, we were trying to look at a program that was going to be sustainable and really freely available to anyone, because it was never about me giving one-on-one dietary advice to families. I didn't have capacity, time, or funding. And luckily, during the randomized control trial phase, we connected with a charity here called Red Kite. They provide psychosocial support to families of children 0 to 18 going through cancer treatment. So they also helped us with their recruitment, and the implementation plan had always been for them to take the program, and that would be part of their suite of programs. Sorry, everyone, about the coughing, which was really just amazing. And really, as a researcher and a clinical researcher, you know, a lot of the time it's like when we first started conceiving this, things had changed and morphed over the time, but it was always about what is the long-term goal. And the fact that we had an organization that was sort of, it really fit into their suite of programs, we were very, very lucky. So what Red Kite have done since, and this has happened really in the last 6 months, they have taken our core program and they put it into their suite of programs. So it's no longer called Reboot. They called it Refresh Kids Eating Program. And as you can see on the right, they've made it look a whole lot better than we did. A lot of the, even though a lot of the content that went online was helped design by School of Engineering, a lot of the design was done by our PhD students and our RAs and everyone's who's working on it. We're dietitian and researchers. We're not artists. So it was really nice. They took it and made it look way better than we ever did. So they've rebranded it. They have it under Red Kite colours. And they rebranded it and put it all online as a purely online program. So as you can see on the right, that's what it looked like. And if you go to Red Kite, I don't think you can log on and see the whole thing, but you'll be able to see sort of the front end of what the program is. So that's a really exciting thing. And I'm still in contact with Red Kite, and they've definitely had some really good positive feedback. And what's really nice, and I actually meant to catch up with them before this presentation, they're now introducing a few parent groups where they get together for those parents who've gone through the program to do some peer discussion, which is really, really exciting. Let's see. So my final slide, so I stopped choking. Really, in conclusion, we found from the RCT and the program that Reboot is acceptable and appropriate for parents of childhood cancer survivors. As I said, we found improvements in fruit and vegetable intake consumed and parent confidence. But again, this program is still an adjunct for other nutrition advice post-cancer treatment. It's still only helping a small group. and it's really specific about fruit and vegetable intake and dietary patterns, and really can be used then with, with other forms of dietary intervention in this group. And that I will say thank you again to everyone. Thank you to all the parents who've been through the program, both the pilot and the RCT. And I really appreciate all the support that we have got. So thank you. I might stop sharing screen actually. Sorry, and keep choking as well at the same time.
No worries. Thank you very much, Jen. That was excellent to kind of see it all come together. And yeah, I think when we do research, we forget that there's always this massive backstory informing this the sort of end point that the glamorous part where you get to talk about something that you've done and where there's been an impact. But yeah, all the legwork earlier is, we often forget. So it was really good to get reminded about that and actually see just how long you've been thinking about doing this project for. And I suppose it's really not reassuring because we're all in the same boat. Our survivors float out into the middle of nowhere with in terms of feeling supported or lack thereof in this space. It's sort of the concentration is just on treatment and survival, and then they survive, and then it's just to go back to normal. And this version of normal it's not what they remember, and it's actually quite difficult adapting to this new normal for these families. So I think this is such legs for this this project. And we're saying earlier, nutrition doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are other sort of pillars of health that sort of influence quality of life and well-being, etc. And as those suggestions said, physical activity was one of them. I do know that in Australia, out of UNSW, you've got other amazing researchers that have done sort of physical activity programs for childhood cancer survivors using sort of online platforms, the work that Lauren Ha has done. Do you think that would be, is there scope to grow Refresh now, or as it is now termed, or?
That's an interesting question. And funnily enough, I know Lauren has had a few chats with Red Kite. So again, Red Kite, as I said, it's a charity-based organisation. So it's not providing like medical services, but Lauren and David, they've had discussions with Red Kite about whether they will end up taking the program. I don't know where it's at because I think they're still in the intervention, but I think it's probably like that would be one really good option really, is if these kind of organizations that can support it would take the program as well. I don't know if they would then implement, integrate it with us. I'd been in conversations with Lauren and David Mizraki, who was one of the supervisors over many years, and some of the others who worked there, about trying to integrate it somehow. And I think the only reason we didn't at the time was because our projects were just at the different phases. I think we were further along the RCT and Lauren was just starting hers, but the discussions had been there. And I think if I'd still remain full-time at UNSW or the timing better, we would have probably integrated them into one suite. I think they could be separate. They don't have to come together. I think you've just got options and modules. And so I think watch this space. I don't know where it's at, but I mean, ideally, if their program ends up next to Refresh in Red Kite and readily available to, lots of families who they want it for free, that would be the ideal, really.
And I know, one of the things that we thought about here in New Zealand was, obviously this is a program designed for Australia, but here and around the world, we all have the same problems in our survivors: poor dietary patterns, significant increases in overweight and obesity, really sort of dysfunctional relationships with food, and sort of, a lot of that kind of fussy eating appearing in these populations. There's often with research, the only way you sort of change guidelines is by repeating research around the world rather than trying to build a whiz-bang thing on your own, because repetition is how we get to change and strengthen the evidence. Is there opportunity for countries around the world to look to adapting Reboot, or is it because it's now with Red Kite, do they hold, where's the, yeah,
that's a really good question. I don't know about, yeah, it's funny, no one actually knows who has the IP. I shouldn't say that on the thing. I know this is being recorded. IP is always tricky, and actually technically IP for the program, because I was conjoined with the hospital and the university, they half own it, both of them. That makes it a bit tricky. That's a really good question, but I actually think there would be capacity. I mean, the thing about Red Kite program, it really is still only available to Australian children because they've got to like log in and be accessed. So I don't think it would be available to I don't think it'd even be available for kids in Aotearoa. So
No.
the answer is I can't see any reason why not. They don't own it. They've just taken the program. So, yes, there potentially would be opportunities to adapt it because, I mean, we didn't own the original program either. It was Newcastle and they kind of let us have it. So I think the answer is yes. I mean, and again, this is not an intervention that's really that fancy. It really isn't. It was just to the point is, and that's why showing the history of it is like, we identified that fussy eating fruit and vegetable is, and let's help parents with it. So, and again, it's not going to help everyone. So the answer is yes. There should be no reason why if anyone else wanted to adopt it, there is definitely would be an opportunity to do so.
I wonder if developing like an adaptation kind of toolkit for people. I'm just thinking about like how to make it easy for countries to replicate it around the world. Maybe a discussion for offline.
Yes, I was going to say, I'm like, oh, yes, in my spare time.
More research.
Except, Amy, I need to write this up still, remember?
Yes, absolutely.
Get it published.
Yes, I will stop hogging the questions if anyone else has any questions at all. That's all good. You can feel free to write them in the chat if you are not keen to say it out loud.
And I'm happy, Amy, if you want to send around my email, my university email address.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I suppose just one other discussion point is you spoke to Reboot being sort of at the bottom of this pyramid of care potentially that our childhood cancer survivors need. I mean, what do you envisage? What is this like? What is this pyramid? What does it look like?
And I think that's a good question. I think for me, when I'm thinking of the pyramid, I'm thinking specifically about the kind of fussy eating pyramid, like as in not the pyramid for food, but as in when you've got that level of kids who are, and again, this is what you would see in the general population. So you've got kids who are fussy because, it's what you would expect to see in most, 50% of kids at the age of about 5 would see some general fussy eating as part of development. And I guess for a lot of our kids, that kind of fussy eating that we're seeing in childhood cancer survivors is very similar. It's sort of maybe a bit more extreme version of it, but it's something that's fixable. And then you've got the ones in the middle who have got more extreme kind of levels of, I guess, probably, I haven't got defined it. It's not a defined thing, but, food, you're starting to see food aversion. So they're going to need more than, just providing, just using principles of division of responsibility, and food providing is not going to be enough, which again is the same in the general population. If you've got kids with food phobia, food aversions, then you need a little bit more intensive feeding therapy. And again, I don't know models overseas. In Australia, we do have, scattered around sort of food therapy groups where you've got like dietitians and speech pathologists and OT who do a lot of the work. And then you've got the top of the pyramid, and these are the kids who, for me, were the ones who were diagnosed before the age of 6 months, were tube fed, had very intensive treatments. So these would be like your neuroblastomas, your myelodyloblastomas, who just never learned how to eat. They never learned to chew and swallow. They had such disruption. They finished treatment at 12 months and they've never learned how to eat a food. And for those who, most of us would probably be dietitians. We know if you miss that window of opportunity to eat and be exposed to new foods and exposed to different flavors and exposed to different textures between 6 and 12 months, it's a lot to reverse that. And this program is never going to do it, because no amount of providing and cooking together is ever going to help those children. That is intensive feeding therapy, and that's where I think of it. But I guess to that point, and I'll come back to it in a second, but again, that's just that fussy eating thing. I guess there is still a group. This group I didn't focus on, even though we are seeing obesity and overweight. I didn't want this to be about a weight program. I wanted this to be about dietary habits and dietary patterns. I guess you're also probably looking at a group, those who are significantly overweight, then that's a whole different type of intervention as well. So this is probably one little piece of all the different types of interventions that are needed. I just wanted to keep it as sort of general as possible.
It's a very complicated puzzle.
Yes.
And the rate limiting factor is money for funding to get it done.
To get it done, and really is to also know sometimes what to do. We know dietary change, health behavior change is hard. I chose the easy group really, which are the kind of only slightly fussy eaters. I didn't go with the hard fussy eaters or those with sort of significant rates of obesity.
Yeah, no, fair. Raquel.
Yes, thank you so much for presenting. I actually really enjoyed the presentation. In a way, sometimes it's really hard to design a relatively simple study because there is, when you're doing the research, looking at dietary patterns, there is so much to focus on that actually, generally, I think simple studies probably work better. So yeah, congratulations on that. I think obviously you presented some of the results in terms of the fruit and vegetables and how it improved in the intervention group. But how about the other foods? Was there a reduction on some of the junk foods or other foods that perhaps we would classify as unhealthy in the intervention?
Yeah, so we didn't. Interestingly, we did. The short answer is no, we don't actually have that data. We did. So we had a few different measures, including at the start we tried doing wasn't food 24-hour recalls and multiple 24-hour recalls, so we could get more of the dietary patterns. So the ones I presented were more of your sort of quantitative, sort of self-reported intake of fruit and vegetable. We also had other measures, but trying to get parents to even do a 24-hour recall over the phone almost ended up impossible. Interestingly, and this is all the stuff you don't know, we don't talk about, but interestingly, when we did the pilot, we actually used a food frequency questionnaire, which is a great questionnaire, can give really great information about dietary patterns. Could not get parents to fill it out. It was too long for anyone who've ever used, and the food frequency questionnaire is a validated one in Australia, but it's like over 100 questions. Basically what happened is we couldn't use that data because parents we could not even get them to do the 24-hour recall. And even though that's not the best, it was at least going to be something looking at like food intake. And so in the end, we just couldn't do it. So that thing about like trial versus real life and what you can get parents to do. So the answer is we don't have the information, which is a shame. But it just comes down to that is a real life of research. So that's why I thought I'd tell you the truth. It's real life. It's like parents, and there's like we were on the phone, going, yeah, can we do the 24-hour recall now? And we didn't even try a food diary. I know that's not even 24-hour recalls aren't even the ideal, but we thought if we can just do a 24-hour recall, we might get something. Could not even get them to do that. So the answer is I don't have it. But then the intervention didn't focus too much on other foods. So we probably wouldn't have seen a change anyway. So.
And in terms of, I'm conscious when you're doing, I guess this is kind of a feasibility type of a study, I suppose. So generally when you're planning a feasibility study, then you try to do a health economic cost, for example, to then move on into a larger trial, which I think this really has the potential for that, because although you didn't look at that data for the other foods, just the fact that they are increasing the fruit and vegetables probably is moving other foods from their diet, I imagine.
Yes, and that was a little bit, we sort of, with the self-efficacy questions kind of uncovered it, but it wasn't enough to really but we do, there was that thing of providing less non-core foods and more fruit and vegetables. That's interesting. Those questions around health economics definitely would be very important. And the plan, our ideal would have been that this was a fully powered randomized control trial. The truth is, in Australia and New Zealand, where we were doing this trial, we've got such tiny numbers. For us to ever get something powered that's an intervention is I mean, like, I'm not going to say impossible, but it would have been another 3 or 4 years to get, like, we just don't have the numbers. We never do. So to that point is, we ever want to be successful in doing these kind of interventions, it has to be multi-site but international. I mean, ours was international. New Zealand, Australia, not the same country, so I'm going to claim it as an international study. Thank you, Amy. But between the two countries, we're so tiny. Like, so.
But it would be interesting to cost the health economic cost, or perhaps the savings that you could make through this study, to plan to get funding, I suppose, for a larger trial, multi-center, international, which is really what we need. If we could potentially do feasibility studies in different countries, and then
it'd be quite a nice be quite a nice piece for the World Cancer Research Fund, because they have a nutrition section in their grants.
Yes,
discussions
and I think
offline.
this study, and I think this study would fit really nicely, to be honest.
No, all very good points. I agree with all of that.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen. I'm conscious of time. It's bedtime for you.
And for you more than anything.
Yeah, we're nearly approaching Friday for me. So thank you to everyone for your time and for listening. And I just really appreciate you sharing those experiences. And it seems to maybe have generated some potential for future. I think, collaboration is key in our small area. So
definitely.
Thank you, everyone, and have a lovely evening, morning, mid-morning. Just have a lovely rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.